I was brushing soot off the rim of my mailbox when the fire marshal gave me the news. "Mr. Vantell, we're ruling this as arson. The accelerant was poured along the base of your back porch. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." My name's Quinton Vantell. I've lived in the same quiet cul-de-sac in Arlington for 7 years. Retired Navy, now a federal judge. I keep to myself, don't throw parties, mow my lawn, pay taxes. I even wave when people pretend not to see me. But what I refuse to do is join the local HOA. That decision apparently made me a target. It started 2 months ago when a lady with a stacked haircut and a clipboard showed up at my door. She smelled like lavender and self-importance. Her name was Brenda Larch, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. "You're the only one on this street not in the HOA," she said, squinting at my porch light like it personally offended her. "That violates our community cohesion standards." "I didn't sign anything when I bought this house," I said, arms crossed. "Well, technically, homes here are encouraged to opt in. But we've recently passed a motion that allows automatic enrollment after 90 days of residence retroactively." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not legally enforceable," she blinked. "Excuse me? I'm a judge, Brenda. You can't retroactively force contracts, not unless you want to lose in court, badly." She glared at me like I had just kicked her HOA issue poodle. From that day on, it got weird. A week later, I got a violation notice for non-uniform mailbox design. Mine was black aluminum. Same as every other mailbox on the block. Then came the fine for unauthorized paint color. My house was beige, the same beige it had always been. Then someone slashed my tires. I installed cameras. Caught a guy in a hoodie tossing eggs over my fence. License plate traced to Brenda's nephew. I filed a police report. Nothing happened. "Just kids being kids," they said. 2 weeks later, I came home from court to find my back door splintered, my living room torched, and half my roof collapsed. My dog, Pepper, was at the vet for a checkup that day. Thank God otherwise. That's when the fire marshal gave me the news. "You said you've been having trouble with the HOA?" he asked. I nodded. "They tried to force me into membership. I refused. Then the harassment started." He shook his head. "We're gonna need to look into this." The thing is, I'd been documenting everything, every letter, every fine, every spray-painted insult on my driveway. I had files, photos, recordings. Even one of Brenda saying, "People who don't follow rules shouldn't live here." I guess she thought I was just some quiet loner, a pushover. What she didn't know was I had already filed a federal civil case against Willow Creek Estates HOA 2 days before the fire. Harassment, property damage. Attempted extortion. What she really didn't know, I signed the warrant for her arrest that same morning. The courthouse parking garage echoed with the heavy tread of my boots as I stepped out of my truck the next morning. My building had been red-tagged overnight uninhabitable. I'd spent the night at a hotel near the courthouse, reviewing my files, updating timelines, and adding last night's arson report to the growing stack of evidence. Inside, the clerk at the civil division gave me a tight nod as I approached. "Judge Vantell," she said, lowering her voice. "Detective Rowan's waiting in Conference 3. Said it was urgent." I didn't ask questions. Just walked past the security doors, through the maze of beige hallways, and opened the door to find Rowan standing beside a whiteboard already covered in photos. "Morning, Quinton," he said, gesturing to the board. "You were right." I scanned the images. Surveillance stills, timelines, vehicle logs. At the center was a photo of Brenda Larch in a red blouse, mid-argument with a man I didn't recognize. "Who's that?" I pointed. "Derek Shaw," Rowan replied. "Private contractor. Used to do maintenance for Willow Creek Estates. Claims Brenda paid him under the table to take care of problem properties." I stepped closer. "Did he confess to starting the fire?" Rowan's jaw clenched. "No. But he admitted to slashing tires and damaging irrigation systems for 3 other residents. People who pushed back on fees or questioned policy changes. He says the fire wasn't him, but he knows who did it. We're working on a name." I took a deep breath. letting the weight of it settle. She weaponized a contractor, Rowan nodded, and it gets worse. We pulled the HOA's financials, found multiple cash withdrawals just under the reporting threshold, frequent, consistent, and all signed off by Brenda and her treasurer. Structuring, I said, trying to avoid scrutiny. Exactly. We've opened a financial crimes investigation. If we can prove the funds were used to harass non-members or bribe enforcement, it'll blow the lid off. I folded my arms. I'll issue the subpoenas myself. Rowan gave a grim nod. We're coordinating with the DA. Expect arrests within 72 hours, but we need to move carefully. Brenda's lawyered up, and from what I hear, she's already trying to spin this as a political vendetta. She's not ready for what's coming, I said, turning toward the door. Later that afternoon, I drove back to the neighborhood, not to my house, but to the community park 2 blocks down. Word had gotten out fast. Residents had seen the fire trucks, the charred beams, the caution tape. They were scared, confused, and some were angry. I knew because a dozen of them were already gathered around the picnic tables when I pulled up. Margaret, the retired schoolteacher from 2 doors down, approached me first. "Quinton," she said quietly, We didn't know she was doing all this." "Is it true she hired someone?" I nodded. "It's true." A younger man in a landscaping uniform, Lewis, I think his name was, stepped forward. "I told her my fees were going up this year. She fined me for unauthorized plant selections, said the roses I planted didn't fit the neighborhood character." A few people murmured. A woman clutched her purse tighter. "I have evidence," I told them. "Documents, security footage, statements, and I'm not the only one. 3 other residents have already filed affidavits. I've submitted them to the court." "Why didn't anyone say anything sooner?" someone blurted. "Because she isolated people," I said, "turned neighbors against each other. Threatened fines and violations to keep everyone quiet." Margaret raised her chin. "What can we do now?" "Start talking," I said. "Share your stories. If she's done this to you, manipulated you, fined you without cause, or used the HOA to control you, write it down. Send it to the DA's office or bring it to me. We're building a case. The more voices we have, the faster this ends." By the time I left, nearly 20 people had pledged to contribute. A few even admitted to being on the board in the past and offered insight into Brenda's backdoor votes and unrecorded meetings. That evening, I met with my friend and longtime colleague, Judge Miriam Ellison, for dinner. She'd presided over a similar HOA corruption case 2 years prior and knew the traps well. "You need to freeze their accounts," she said between bites of salmon. "If they suspect they're cornered, they'll drain everything before you can seize it." "I've already filed the emergency motion," I said. "Should be signed by morning." She gave me a look. "You're going to take this all the way, aren't you?" "They set my house on fire, Miriam." She nodded as if that was all the explanation she needed. The next morning, I was back in court. The emergency request to freeze the HOA's assets was approved, and the order sent to their bank within the hour. Simultaneously, Rowan executed a search warrant on Brenda's home. He called me from the scene. "We found burner phones in a locked drawer," he said. "One of them has messages coordinating payments with a second contractor, someone named Eric. We're tracing the number." I leaned against the wall outside my chambers. "Anything on the arson itself? There's a payment 2 days before the fire. Cash. Labeled special handling." That night, Brenda was arrested at her home, still in her robe, trying to delete files off a laptop when Rowan walked in. Her screams echoed down the block. I watched from my truck, parked just far enough down the street to remain in shadow. The community gathered again the next day, this time in the park's recreation hall. I didn't speak at first. I let them talk. Stories poured out. One man had been fined for leaving his trash bin out for 25 minutes past pickup. Another claimed Brenda threatened to tow his daughter's car for having a political bumper sticker. It wasn't just about control. It was about punishment. When it was finally quiet, I stood. "This isn't the end," I said, "but it's the beginning of something better. The HOA board will be dissolved temporarily. A trustee will be appointed by the court to oversee operations until elections can be held, transparent ones. A hand shot up. What about the fines, all the payments? We'll audit everything, I said. If you were fined unlawfully, there will be restitution. Lewis raised his voice from the back. And the people who helped her, the ones who looked the other way, they won't be ignored, I said. But right now, we focus on truth. Then we rebuild. Afterward, as people filtered out, Margaret approached me again. You know, she said, for all the years you kept to yourself, I think you just saved this neighborhood. I gave her a tired smile. I only did what anyone should have. I stood up. She shook her head. No. You reminded the rest of us how. Back at the hotel that night, I sat at the window, looking out over the city. My house was gone, but something else had been built in its place, something stronger than siding and shingles. A community that finally saw what power unchecked could become. And a judge who refused to let it stand. 3 days after Brenda's arrest, the temporary trustee assigned to Willow Creek Estates arrived with a stack of court orders and 2 county deputies. His name was Theodore Pace, an older man with silver temples, and the look of someone who didn't tolerate games. He'd served as interim trustee in 3 other HOA corruption cases across the state and had a reputation for zero patience and full transparency. The first thing he did was change the locks on the HOA office located in a converted guest suite at the back of the clubhouse. The second was to post a notice on the neighborhood bulletin board. All HOA operations suspended pending financial audit. No new fines will be issued. All collections halted. I wasn't there to see the notices go up. I was back at the courthouse, sitting across from a team of forensic accountants who had just concluded their preliminary sweep of the HOA's ledgers. The lead examiner, a woman named Darlene Chen, tapped her pen against a spreadsheet. We've identified over $80,000 in undocumented withdrawals over the last 16 months, nearly all of them in cash. Several logged with vague descriptors: community enhancement, enforcement services, and my personal favorite, discretionary compliance. Were any of the vendors legitimate? I asked. About half, she said. The rest, shell companies or private individuals with no business licenses. We found 3 payments to someone named Eric Huster, same name Detective Rowan flagged. We traced the funds to a prepaid debit card used to purchase accelerant at a hardware store 2 miles from your home. I leaned back in my chair, jaw tight. That's the link. Darlene nodded. We've already submitted the findings to the DA's office. They're drafting additional charges. Outside the window, rain began to fall soft and steady. The kind of rain that made people stay indoors and look inward. I hoped some of the HOA board members were doing just that. Back in the neighborhood, the fallout had only just begun. Theodore's audit uncovered more than financial misconduct. Several board members had been secretly approving architectural permits for their own family members, bypassing the same rules they enforced on others. One had even used HOA funds to pay off a personal credit card, a fact discovered when a reimbursement request was stapled to the wrong ledger entry. When I returned to the cul-de-sac that evening, I found a crowd gathered outside the clubhouse. Not shouting, just waiting. Curious. A few glanced my way, unsure of how to approach me. I recognized a woman near the front, Vanessa, who lived across from the storm drain. She stepped forward. They're saying you knew about all of this before any of us. That you set it all up, she said, not accusingly but with a kind of cautious awe. I didn't set anything up, I told her. I followed the law, the same law they thought didn't apply to them. A man near the back piped up. Is it true someone actually tried to kill you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning, I was called into a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Rowan was already there, along with an assistant district attorney and 2 men from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The ATF had taken interest due to the deliberate nature of the arson, the accelerant used, the placement, the sophistication. The senior agent, a tall man with a voice like gravel, laid out what they'd found. The accelerant was poured in a pattern designed to produce maximum structural failure near the gas line. That takes planning and knowledge. This wasn't just vandalism gone wrong. Rowan passed me a folder. Inside were surveillance photos of a man at a storage facility loading a red gas can into the back of a pickup. The timestamp was from the night before the fire. "Eric Huster," I said. "Confirmed," the agent replied. "We picked him up this morning. He's already talking." Claims he was hired for intimidation, said he never meant for anyone to get hurt. "He lit a house on fire," I said flatly. The agent nodded. "He'll be charged federally, and he's implicating Brenda." Said she offered an extra $5,000 if the guy was scared enough to leave. Rowan looked at me. "We're charging her with conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder, and racketeering." The prosecutor added, "And we're opening a grand jury investigation into the HOA as an organization. If we can prove it was operating as a criminal enterprise, we'll dissolve it permanently." I left that meeting with a strange sense of stillness, not peace. Not yet, but the kind of pause that comes when the worst part is over and the reckoning begins. At noon, I met with the newly appointed HOA trustee at a local diner. Theodore had requested the meeting to discuss an idea. "I've been reviewing the bylaws," he said over coffee. "There's a clause that allows for dissolution of the HOA by a 2/3 majority vote if the organization is deemed harmful to the safety or integrity of the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think we can get the votes?" He slid a petition across the table with over 60 signatures. "I already did. What happens to the common areas? They'll revert to a community trust managed by a third-party firm. No more board, no more arbitrary fines." I signed my name at the bottom. That evening, the neighborhood held its first open forum since the arrests. This time, it wasn't run by a president or a treasurer. It was held in the school gymnasium down the road and chaired by Theodore and 2 county officials. There were no podiums, no gavel bangs, just folding chairs, a microphone, and people ready to speak. A contractor stood up first, not a resident, but someone who'd worked in the neighborhood for years. "I was blacklisted by Brenda's board for refusing to donate to her neighborhood improvement fund," he said. "I lost over a dozen clients. I'm here because I want to see this place rebuild, not rot." After him, a teenager took the mic. "She fined my mom $200 because my bike was left on the porch. We couldn't afford groceries that week." There were no interruptions, no defenses, just stories. And when they were done, the vote was held, 87% in favor of dissolution. The following morning, the court approved the petition. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association ceased to exist. In its place rose the Willow Creek Civic Neighborhood, an informal, voluntary group created by residents to organize block parties, coordinate lawn care services, and share resources. No dues, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. I was asked to join the advisory council. I declined. "I'm not here to govern," I said. "I'm just trying to rebuild." Rebuild I did. With the insurance settlement and a grant from the state's Victim of Arson Fund, construction began within a month. I kept the same lot but chose a new design brick this time, with reinforced windows and a fire-resistant roof. Pepper got a bigger yard. I got a reinforced mailbox. At the sentencing hearing 6 months later, I sat in the front row as Brenda Larch was handed a 12-year federal sentence for conspiracy, financial fraud, and attempted murder. She didn't look at me once. Eric Huster received 15 years. 2 other board members took plea deals and were barred from serving in any fiduciary role for the rest of their lives. As I walked out of the courtroom, Margaret caught up to me on the steps. "You think this neighborhood will ever be the same?" "No," I said. "But maybe that's a good thing." She nodded, then added, "You're not what I thought you were, you know." I gave her a curious look, quiet, uninvolved, just a guy with a dog and a porch light. I smiled. "Turns out sometimes that's all it takes." The rain had returned by the time I got home. I stood beneath the unfinished frame of my new porch, watching the drops bead on the fresh lumber. Pepper barked once, then settled near my boots. No more threats. No more fines. Just the sound of rain on a roof that would soon be mine again. The scent of sawdust and primer drifted through the framework of what would soon be my new living room. Construction crews had made quick progress. After months of legal chaos, the rhythm of hammers and drills had become a kind of music measured, predictable. I was there every morning, not just to oversee the build, but to make sure no one else tried to interfere again. The crews were local. I'd hired people who lived within 10 miles of Willow Creek, men and women who had seen the news, heard the courtroom audio leaks, and wanted to help. They didn't ask questions. They worked quietly, efficiently. No one mentioned the old house. On the second Tuesday of June, I received a sealed envelope from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Inside were two things: a sworn statement from a former HOA board member named Curtis Brennan, and a copy of a wire transfer receipt. Curtis hadn't testified during the trials. He'd vanished the day Brenda was arrested, skipped town, and was presumed to be in Arizona with his sister. But apparently, fear or maybe guilt had caught up with him. He'd walked into a federal office in Colorado Springs and spilled everything. He confirmed that a second arson had been planned. This time, the target was Lewis the landscaper who had spoken at the park meeting. The HOA had flagged him early on as a potential disruptor, someone Brenda described as too visible to control. She had wanted to send a message, but the plan had stalled when my house went up in flames sooner than expected. According to the statement, the plan was to torch Lewis's shed and blame it on faulty gasoline storage. Curtis had supplied the gloves and burner phone. He'd backed out only after realizing the insurance fraud angle could spiral. The wire transfer was dated 4 days before my house burned. It matched a cash withdrawal from the HOA's account, one not previously connected to any vendor or expense. The recipient, a small business account under the name Huster Property Services. Not a company, just a front. The case wasn't closed after all. I called Rowan. He answered on the first ring. "I was about to call you. The Dodge's opening a wider investigation. They think there's more." "There is," he said. Curtis's statement triggered a review of civil cases filed by the HOA over the past 5 years. At least 9 involved forced compliance through fabricated violations. 2 homeowners lost their properties after defaulting on liens that were never legally established. I stared out at the foundation of my rebuild. "So this goes beyond harassment." "Way beyond," he said. "We're dealing with a pattern here: coordinated intimidation, fraudulent foreclosures, even evidence tampering. This might qualify under the Civil RICO statute. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." It clicked into place. "They used HOA authority like a mob would use a loan shark," I said. Rowan didn't disagree. "The new task force will need your files, everything you didn't submit during the original trial." "I've got it," I said, "and I've got something else." That evening, I dug into my hard drive. I hadn't touched the old folders in weeks, not since Brenda's sentencing, but I'd kept every document, every digital note, every recording. There was one I hadn't included in the court filings because I wasn't sure it mattered at the time. It was recorded during a neighborhood meeting Brenda held 2 months before the fire. She was speaking off the record, unaware that my neighbor Steve, a veteran with a concealed mic, had decided to record her. On the file, she says, "Some of these people think they can just live here without participating. They think they're above the rules. Well, I've got news for them. If they don't respect our authority, they won't have a place to sleep." I sent the file to Rowan. He called back an hour later. "This confirms intent," he said. "We're reopening the case against the wider board under federal conspiracy charges, and we're adding obstruction for those who destroyed records." The next week was a blur of depositions. Curtis returned to Virginia under federal protection. He gave a full audio-recorded statement detailing how Brenda had organized vote manipulation during board elections, using proxy ballots signed by elderly residents who no longer lived in the community. He admitted that at least 3 elections were rigged. When the indictments dropped, 7 more former board members were arrested. 2 were charged with wire fraud. 1 with perjury for false statements to investigators. Another with bribery he'd been paid in cash to sign off on forged violation notices used to trigger property liens. The neighborhood, once fractured and bitter, began to change. Lewis started a community garden on the empty lot where the HOA office used to stand. The building had been condemned after the forensic team found boxes of shredded documents in the garage freezer. Vanessa, who had once hesitated to speak up, organized monthly neighborhood dinners. No speeches, no agendas, just food and conversation. One evening, I showed up with Pepper, expecting to stay 10 minutes. I ended up there for 3 hours, sitting at a long table with people who had once looked at me like I was a problem. Now they called me by name. "I heard you're not going back to the bench," Margaret said, handing me a paper plate with roasted chicken and sweet corn. "I've got 6 months of leave banked," I told her. "Figured I'd use them." "You deserve more than that," she said. "You gave us our lives back." I didn't answer. I just nodded and fed Pepper a piece of chicken under the table. The final chapter came quietly. 6 months after the second wave of arrests, the newly formed Civic Neighborhood Council received a letter from the State Attorney General's office. It confirmed that all fines issued between March and November of the previous year were deemed unlawful. Refunds would be issued. Liens would be wiped. And anyone who had lost property due to HOA action could file for restitution through a special fund. Lewis got his fines back. Vanessa's mother, who had been threatened with foreclosure, received full forgiveness. Even the contractor who had lost clients got a public apology and 3 new landscaping contracts from the county. As for me, I rebuilt my house exactly the way I wanted. No approvals, no forms, no HOA inspections. Just clean lines, fireproof siding, and a reinforced back porch. One morning I found an envelope on my doorstep, no return address. Inside was a single photograph of my old house taken from across the street just after the fire. On the back, someone had written, "Never again." I didn't need to know who sent it. The message was clear. That afternoon, I walked to the park where the very first neighborhood meeting had taken place. The benches had been repainted. The community board now displayed flyers for local gigs, gardening tips, and a neighborhood chess club that met every Sunday. No more violation notices, no more threats. Vanessa spotted me and waved. "We've got an open seat," she called. I joined them. No speeches. No reminders of what had come before. Just laughter, shared stories, and the quiet understanding that we had turned the tide. The law had done its job. The community had found its voice. And the ashes of what they tried to burn had become the foundation for something stronger.